If these weren't the albums you were listening to in 1992, I'm not saying you don't know hip hop. I'm not challenging your expertise, but you might have missed one of the most important turning points in our culture, because 1992 was the year the West Coast started taking control of the conversation, the East Coast was quietly rebuilding itself, the South was planting the early seeds of what would eventually become a powerhouse, and the underground was experimenting with sounds that would influence the next decade. And 10 albums from that year helped shape where hip-hop was headed.
I am Broadway, the lyricist, homie, just let me do my thing. I'm on top, on my grind, I'ma always get it.
Thank you so much for clicking on this video. I go by the name Broadway, the Lyricist. I'm a hip-hop enthusiast and cultural storyteller. And if you're a fan of hip-hop commentary, history, or anything related to the culture, be sure to hit that like button. And if you're new here, consider subscribing to the channel and click that bell icon so you guys never miss an upload. So we're breaking down 10 essential hip-hop albums from 1992 that helped shape the culture. Not just the biggest albums, not just the ones that sold the most, but the ones that pushed the sound, the regions, and the direction of hip-hop forward. Let's start with the one that changed everything. When people talk about the West Coast taking over hip-hop in the 90s, they're probably talking about one album, The Chronic by Dr. Dre. Before this album, West Coast rap was loud, aggressive, and militant. Think of that NWA spirit. Fast tempos, hard drums, street chaos. But Dre slowed everything down. He brought in Parliament-style funk, thick bass lines, whining synthesizers, smooth grooves, and just like that, G-Funk was introduced. But this album did something even bigger. It introduced the world to a young artist named Snoop Doggy Dogg. Nothing But a G Thing, Dre Day, Let Me Ride. After this album dropped, the West Coast didn't just have hits, they had momentum. And momentum in hip-hop is everything. While the West Coast was redefining the sound commercially, the East Coast was refining its musical identity. Enter Mecca and the Soul Brother by Pete Rock and CL Smooth. If The Chronic sounded like cruising through LA in a lowrider, this album sounded like New York soul music on dusty vinyl. Pete Rock's production was warm, jazzy, and layered with emotion. But the centerpiece of the entire album was one record, They Reminisce Over You. A tribute record that still hits listeners emotionally 3 decades later. That horn sample alone is enough to give hip-hop fans chills. Now here's where it gets interesting, because not every West Coast artist in 1992 was making gangsta rap. The Pharcyde dropped Bizarre Ride to the Pharcyde, and it was one of the most unique albums of the era. Instead of street aggression, the Pharcyde leaned into humor, awkward storytelling, and offbeat personality. Your Mama, Passing Me By, these records proved that West Coast hip-hop could be creative, introspective, and funny, all at the same time, which made the group stand out in a landscape dominated by tougher images. Back on the East Coast, Brand Nubian released In God We Trust, one of my personal favorites. But there was a major shift in the group. Grand Puba had left, which meant Sadat X and Lord Jamar had to hold things down. Now for many groups, losing a key member would derail the momentum. But Brand Nubian doubled down on their identity, Afrocentric philosophy, 5% of teachings, sharp, uncompromising lyricism, songs like Pass the Gat, Punks Jump Up to Get Beat Down. This album proved something very important. Brand Nubian wasn't just about personalities, it was about principles. If you want to hear the DNA of East Coast boom-bap, look no further than Gang Starr's Daily Operation. DJ Premier's production was stripped down and gritty. Guru's delivery was calm, confident, and razor sharp. No gimmicks, no distractions, just bars and beats. Tracks like Take It Personal and Ex-Girl to the Next Girl became blueprints for what East Coast hip-hop would sound like moving into the mid-90s. Now, while the coast were dominating headlines, something important was happening down south. UGK released Too Hard to Swallow, Bun B, and Pimp C, Port Arthur, Texas. Now, this album didn't explode commercially the way some others did, but culturally, it mattered because it introduced a Southern voice that felt authentic, grounded, and different from what the coast were doing. And years later, artists from Houston, Atlanta, and Memphis would expand on that blueprint. Ice-T's OG took the West Coast storytelling into darker territory. This album was raw, political, and unapologetically confrontational, but it also sparked national controversy. The song Cop Killer triggered outrage from politicians and media outlets. And suddenly, hip-hop wasn't just about music anymore. It was part of a national debate. EPMD dropped Business Never Personal in 1992. At the time, nobody realized it would be their last album before breaking up. But the album gave the world something important, the introduction of Redman. If you go back and you listen to the song Headbanger, You can hear the moment a new Starr stepped onto the scene. Later that same year, Redman released his debut album, What the Album. And right away, you could tell he was different. Funky beats, unpredictable lyrics, a wild sense of humor. Redman didn't sound like anyone else in hip-hop at the time. And that originality helped to establish him as one of the most respected MCs of the era. And last but certainly not least, another important album from 1992 came from Diamond D, Stunts, Blunts, and Hip Hop. This album represented a moment in hip hop when producers weren't just behind the boards anymore. They were stepping to the microphone as well. Diamond D was also a part of the Digging in the Crates crew and helped push that movement forward. So when people talk about the golden era of hip hop, 1992 doesn't always get the spotlight, but it should, because that year helped set the stage for everything that followed. The West Coast takeover, the East Coast renaissance, the Southern rise, and the underground experimentation that kept the culture evolving. 1992 wasn't just another year in hip-hop. It was a turning point. But I definitely want to hear from you. Which album from 1992 do you think had the biggest impact on the culture? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this breakdown, be sure to hit that like button, consider subscribing to the channel, and again, click that bell icon so you guys never miss an upload. And if you want to see more videos just like this, be sure to click on my albums we don't talk about enough playlist. Thank you guys so much. I'll see you on the next one. Peace.